Hi, everybody. This is Alexa Tinsley. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at JET Foundation. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Our topic today is making driving accessible and what to consider before getting behind the wheel. We are going to give everybody about a minute to hop on, but while we are doing that, if you could please put your name, where you're from, and your child's age in the chat, we would love to hear from you guys, and we will be right back. Thank you, guys. All righty. Okay, so again, I'm Alexa Tinsley. If you don't already know me, I am the Director of Community Engagement for JET Foundation. We are here today to talk about making driving accessible and what to consider before getting behind the wheel. We are very excited for our speakers to be joining us, sharing their expertise and sharing their knowledge with us. So thank you all for coming and joining us for this topic. We're really grateful to our speakers. We have John Howell, who is the Area Director for the Division of Vocational Rehab based in Florida. We have Stephen Sundarrao, is an Associate Director for the University of South Florida's Center for Assistive Rehabilitation and Robotics Technologies Department. And then we also have Jack Wolf, who is a 23-year-old living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, who earned his driver's license after enduring a very long 2-year process from start to finish. So we are so excited to hear from all of them and have them share their knowledge with you. But before we get started, as usual, I do want to mention a few things. If this is your first webinar series, we do host these throughout the year. We will have another one coming up at the end of November, and we will start back again in 2023. So we're very excited to offer these and these educational components to you throughout the year. It is being recorded, so if for any reason you have to hop off, if someone you know did want to attend and wasn't able to, if anything does happen, it will be recorded later and will be put up on our website and our YouTube for you to watch later. So today the presentation will be about 40 to 50 minutes. We will still have a Q&A portion at the end. So if you do have any questions at all, please use the Q&A panel, which is on mine, the bottom right-hand corner, it'll say Q&A. You can type your questions into there. You can also chat during the call as well, but we will be answering questions in the Q&A box. We will do our best to make sure that we, if there are any questions that go into that chat box, make sure that they get answered, but we will be primarily focusing on that Q&A panel box for those question and answer at the end. So that is all from me. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I am going to hand it off to John.
Okay, thank you. We'll see if the technology gods are with us this morning.
They
this
will
afternoon,
be.
anyway.
I feel it.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. All right. Success. You see that? Good.
Yep, you're good.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate Ms. Tinsley and the folks from the JET Foundation for hosting this today. My name is John Howell, and I'm an area director for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is a state agency that helps people with disabilities to go to work. And both Stephen and I are both based out of the Tampa area in Florida. So we've had our experience this morning with a tropical storm. So we've had some wind and some rain. At this point, I think the worst is past us. So it's very, very nice to be with you guys. Let's see, going through, I wanted just to give a brief overview of the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. I'll talk about the eligibility criteria, the order of selection, an overview of some services that the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation offers. I'll talk a little bit about financial participation and other services. I know that the focus is on making driving accessible, but I know that the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation may serve as a resource to help people with obtaining a modification for their vehicle if they intend on securing employment. So the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation is a nationwide program in the state of Florida. It's called the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. In some states, it may be called disability services or rehabilitation services, whatever the case may be. So in this presentation, I've included a link that will bring you to whatever vocational rehabilitation program you have in your state. There are actually 78 different rehabilitation programs in the United States. It's in all 50 states, in addition to the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and then 4 other territories. So if you decide to relocate from the states and move out to a territory, that'll be fantastic. The Division of Vocational Rehabilitation through the Rehabilitation Services Administration will be able to help people with disabilities to go to work in those territories as well. So since we're from Florida, I wanted to go through each state does operate a little bit different. We receive our funding from the federal government, but it's actually operated through the state agency. So as you can see, here's the state of Florida. We are in Area 4, which is basically this little Tampa Bay area. But that's I'm responsible for 4 counties. We have 13 offices. I've actually worked for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation for 26 years. So it's a wonderful agency, and I'm happy to share a little bit about that with you. Now, as I said, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation is a federal and state program that provides services for people with disabilities to go to work. It's all about employment. We help people to either prepare for, to get, to keep, or to regain employment. It can be full-time work or it can be part-time work. Part-time is very acceptable for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. However, that employment has to be in a competitive, integrated environment. We don't support adult day training facilities or sheltered workshops or anything like that. It's regular types of employment. It can be self-employment in some circumstances, but it's all in a competitive, integrated environment. Now, as far as the types of disabling conditions, we work with people who have physical disabilities, mental health disorders, developmental or intellectual disabilities, sensory impairments. So it's considered a disability neutral program. But I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that. I work in a state building, and it's always interesting. We've got the Department of Corrections that's right around the corner from my office, and it never fails. I'll frequently get a question that comes to me and says, "Oh, well, I'm just getting out of prison. Can you guys help me to get a job?" I'm like, well, we work with people who have disabilities. The disability has to interfere with your ability to work. And it's like, well, I've been in prison for the last 20 years. That affects my ability to work. That is not a disability. That does clearly impact a person's ability to work. However, I wanted to clarify what a disability is. So a definition of disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Well, then that raises the question, what is a major life activity? So that's caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and in terms of vocational rehabilitation, working. Just because a person has a disabling condition doesn't mean that they're automatically going to be eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. VR is an eligibility program, not an entitlement program. A little bit different than some other programs that are in the community. So the eligibility criteria is that a person has to have a disabling condition that interferes with their ability to work. That disability we have to be able to benefit the individual in going to competitive employment in an integrated environment, and the person must require VR services. So in order to speed up the eligibility process, a person can bring in medical records. if that's always helpful, there's a list of different documents that can certainly help the counselors in making and speeding up that eligibility determination. By federal law, we have 60 days to make an eligibility determination. Doesn't mean it's going to take 60 days. It means that we have up to 60 days. And the more documentation that a person can bring in, the faster that eligibility determination can be made. So some of the things, if a person receives SSI or SSDI, any medical or psychological records, any school records, if they have a mental health disorder, any type of treatment plans, or in cases if a person has an intellectual or developmental disability, their support plan. All of those plans are extremely helpful in helping the VR counselor determine what type of occupation the individual might be successful in. So the next thing, federal law requires that we actually serve people with the most significant disabilities first. It's a little counterintuitive. Rather than a person who may have some type of a mild disabling condition, as far as our order of selection, we're going to serve an individual with a most significant disability first. Now, the way that we determine who the severity of a person's disabling condition, it's a factor of course, their diagnosis, but also functional capacities as far as different limitations for their functional capacities, and then what services they require, and then how long are they going to require those services. So here we've got a little formula. The counselors will take that into consideration once they've made that eligibility determination. Next, so as far as those functional capacities, things that we look at a person's mobility, communication, self-care, self-direction, interpersonal skills, work tolerance, and work skills. So those are all things that a VR counselor is going to look at to determine that order of selection and to determine the significance of disability. We'll also look at some services, or one of the things that the counselors will discuss with the person is what type of services are required to help that individual achieve a specific employment outcome. Some services that can be provided include education and training, mental health services, medical services, prosthetics and orthotics, job placement, job coaching, a lot of different things. However, it's like many other community service programs or state agencies. If a person has SSI or SSDI, they've got Medicare or Medicaid, of course, we would ask that they use those resources first for medical services. If they don't have that, then of course VR can assist with that as well. Other support services, maintenance, transportation, childcare, basically the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation can assist with a number of different services as long as those services are all designed to help a person to go to work. So here's the VR process. Go to that link that I included earlier, and I believe that they're going to attach that in the chat. Go there, call up your nearest VR office, apply for services. They do the evaluation. They'll do a plan. It's called an IPE, or an individualized plan for employment. That would include some of those different services that are required to help achieve that employment goal, and then focus on job placement, and then the case is closed. It's one of those programs where not a long-term program. Once a person has maintained employment for at least 90 days in that chosen occupation, then the case is closed. Now, it may take 4 years for a person to achieve that successful employment outcome. For example, if a person would go on for a bachelor's degree, if that was required to help the person achieve that vocational goal, you can see where that would extend the life of the case. Once they've completed that training, then we would focus on job placement. Once the person has been placed in that chosen vocational goal, then the case would be closed. You can see once they've been working for at least 90 days, then the case would be closed. It's a great program. Like I said, I love the mission of vocational rehabilitation. Here is a little flow chart where we go through do a preliminary assessment, make an eligibility determination, go through. If there's a waiting list in your state, that may or may not be the case. Develop the IPE, or that individualized plan for employment, provide those services, focus on placement, and again, upon successful employment for 90 days or 180 days, if the person is under supported employment, then the case is closed. Now, a person can always come back to vocational rehabilitation if that's necessary. However, we're not going to keep the case open for an extended period of time after the person has achieved that vocational goal. One of the things that I did want to bring up is financial participation. Basically, some services we may, depending on if a person lives with their parents, depending on if a person is currently employed, a person may be required to pay for some services. That's going to vary from state to state. However, if a person receives SSI or SSDI, all services would be exempt, and they wouldn't have to pay anything towards any services that are provided through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. One of the things that's always helpful is clients' responsibilities. They're like, well, what do I need to do? It's always wonderful for the participants that we're working with to be committed to going to work. Of course, that's our focus, is helping people with disabilities to obtain employment. In doing that, we ask that they cooperate with the VR counselors, and the best way that you can do that is through ongoing communication. Of course, there are clients' rights to confidentiality, informed choice, non-discrimination, and of course, participants can always appeal a decision if they disagree with a decision that their VR counselor has made. One of the ways to avoid that is making sure that there is informed choice. That's when the VR counselors will speak with the individual, talking about what are some different options where you're looking at the advantages, but also some of the disadvantages of each option. We call that informed choice. It's not just a person's interest, but also is that interest consistent with their strengths, their resources, their priorities, concerns, abilities, and capabilities. So those are always very good conversations to have. We consider that guidance and counseling, and it's always extremely helpful. The last thing that I wanted to touch on, through the Workforce Investment and Opportunities Act, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation can also provide pre-employment transition services to students who are currently enrolled in school. So for high school students and younger, actually from beginning at age 14, we can really start to focus on employment. What type of jobs is a person interested and able to do? We can do work-based learning experiences where the person can do on-the-job training, and we can do workplace readiness training. So those are all things that are all helpful that can be provided by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation in your state. So that's it. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And now I'll go ahead and open up if you guys have any questions about that. If not, we'll go ahead and let Stephen talk about some services through rehab engineering and making driving accessible.
Thanks, John. Yeah. And you'll hear more about how vocational rehab and driving can sometimes work together. So Stephen will talk a little bit about that, and so will Jack. But at this time, we don't have any questions. If you think of any, you can always put them in the Q&A and we will answer them at the end. But for now, I will hand it off to Stephen.
All right. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
You are good.
Okay, good. So I'm with the University of South Florida, and my background is mechanical engineering, been working as a rehab engineer for over 30 years. This is my email address, and if you have any questions or need more information, feel free to email me after today. So as John mentioned, we work closely with vocational rehab. We've had a contract with them since 2001 to provide rehab technology consultation services. So we have engineers and staff around the state. Most of them are actually co-located in VR offices. So we do about 250 vehicle modifications statewide. About 50% of them are actually high-tech, primarily because, as John mentioned, VR serves individuals with the most severe disabilities as a priority. And we also are responsible for recruiting and registering vendors on a statewide basis. So besides vehicle modifications, we also do home modifications, mobility devices, technology for individuals with sensory and cognitive disabilities.
There are several considerations in selecting a vehicle. Can the individual enter the...
Sorry about that. I think it was a little voiceover that was going on. So one of the first things I kind of wanted to start off with is really vehicle selection. So some of the things to consider is if the person is going to access the vehicle in their mobility device, and in that case, making sure that the dimensions are compatible with the mobility device. Once the person is in the inside the vehicle, how is the wheelchair going to be stored? If you're considering driving, it's really important to get a driving evaluation in a vehicle that's going to be similar to the vehicle that the customer is going to be using. Because what that does is really identify all the equipment that's going to be needed, everything from the access to the vehicle into the driver station. What we often do in Florida is actually get the individual licensed in the evaluator vehicle, even before the vehicle is purchased and modified. It's also important to provide adequate training. So one of the things that's provided is not just the equipment, but at least, often with high-tech equipment, and I'll show some examples of that, the type of equipment, often the training can be, 20 to 40 hours in the person's vehicle. So all of these things need to be considered, and vehicle selection really ensures that the appropriate equipment also is then followed up on. So I'm going to go through some of the things that can be done to modify a vehicle for accessibility, everything from accessing the vehicle to modifications to the primary controls, which are the gas, brake, and steering systems. And then it's also important to consider secondary controls, which is everything from your gear shift operation to air conditioning to opening and closing the windows. So this is an example, which is a common modification to several different types of minivans. So what you see actually is a vehicle that has had the floor converted and lowered. So typically, the door entry on a minivan is about 44 inches, but that's not enough for somebody to enter the vehicle in a wheelchair. So you can increase the height by lowering the floor anywhere from 10 inches to 14 inches, and then also have a ramp installed. So this is an automatic ramp. It can be manual. So sometimes if somebody doesn't need it for driving, or if they're going to always be a passenger, you can also get just a manual folding ramp. But in this case, this ramp and the door work in conjunction, where once the ramp is stored, the door closes. So you can see the interior over here, where the yellow arrows kind of show how much the floor has been kind of lowered. And you can see, it really opens up the space. And typically a conversion like this is just a conversion, can cost as much as $30,000. And these are usually vehicles that are new, but a lot of second stage manufacturers like Braun or VMI do offer used vehicles that have a new conversion. Another option might be for some individuals, the concern sometimes with the minivan is that it's very close to the ground. So if you live in a rural environment, off-road environment, people need different kinds of vehicles. So sometimes a pickup truck can be used if person is able to transfer into it, and then a lift stored in the back. But there's also a company in North Carolina that provides a powered lift for somebody who's going to be a driver and needs a truck. This can be an option. The disadvantage of this type of a conversion over a minivan is really in the case of a minivan, if for whatever reason the individual is not able to drive the vehicle, if they're not feeling well, they can still be a passenger in a minivan. Unfortunately, in a truck, the only accessible space is the driver station. So if the person is not able to drive, the truck might not be a good option. There's also different kinds of seats that swivel out, and it makes it convenient where if a person is able to transfer, they can transfer into a seat like this. Also, if the person is not driving from the wheelchair, has the ability to transfer from their wheelchair, there are power seat bases that basically move the seat back, swivel it, raise and lower the seat as needed to make it convenient for doing a transfer. And often, as I mentioned in a minivan, sometimes the person can be a driver, but sometimes they can also be a passenger. So you can have a seat base that's removable. So if the person in the wheelchair is not going to be the driver, you can position another seat in place for any of the family members. It's very important for wheelchairs to be secured, both manual chairs and power chairs, because if the wheelchair is not secured, even in a slow-moving situation, and if the brake is applied, the wheelchair really becomes like a projectile, and it can push the person against the steering wheel. So there's many different types of securement devices. This is called an easy lock. There's also a Q lock, and essentially there's hardware that's attached to the bottom of the wheelchair, and that locks into a base that's on the floor of the vehicle. Some other options, if somebody has the ability to walk a little bit and they have a mobility device, that can be stored either on the outside of the vehicle. It can be sometimes taken apart and then using a lift stored in the rear of the vehicle. And then there's also motorized lifts, depending on the type of vehicle, that can pick up the mobility device at the back and then pull it into the cargo compartment. Sometimes individuals can transfer. And so this is an example of somebody that has a folding wheelchair, and they have a wheelchair storage compartment on the top of the vehicle. And so again, it depends on the type of wheelchair the person has. It depends on their ability to transfer. And in this case, it also depends on what are the needs in terms of the vehicle that an individual might have. So suppose a minivan or a truck is not an option and the person is able to transfer. This is an example of a sedan being the choice of the vehicle. There's also a modification that's available that actually uses kind of a robotic arm, and it works on smaller SUVs, and it picks up the wheelchair and it brings it all the way to the back and stores it in the hatchback area of a small SUV. So this particular modification can also be expensive, even though we're not lowering the floor. This particular robotic arm can cost as much as $25,000. So getting into the primary controls, one of the most important things is obviously steering. And so some of the things that can be done is if the individual is not able to operate does not have the strength to operate a regular steering wheel, but they're able to reach the steering wheel, but just don't have the strength. You can modify the effort that it takes to how much force it takes to operate the steering wheel. And this can be done mechanically or electronically. The important thing is that if this is done, it's always important to make sure there's a backup system. So in the event the hydraulics or electronic components fail, there's a battery-powered backup that kicks in and allows the person to safely get off the road. The interface to the steering is important. So depending on what kind of grip the person has, they might have a spinner knob, they might have a tri-pin, or they might have a customized cuff that they're holding onto the wheel, because if they're using hand controls, they're only using one hand to steer. And so being able to have full control over the steering, the steering interface is important. Sometimes if a person is not able to get close to the steering wheel, there's an extension that can be added. So this can, add about 4 to 6 inches that can bring it closer to the individual. But in this case, again, the individual is still able to reach the steering wheel, and you can kind of see the spinner knob on the top. There's different kind of mechanical hand controls. Again, it's important to evaluate. You can have something where you push down and then you rock it. You can have something where it's called a push right angle. So you push forward for the brake and then pull it down towards the knee for the gas. And it's important because both of them have advantages and disadvantages, but also depending on the individual's range of motion and strength, the proper hand control should be prescribed. Sometimes, for individuals that have lost use of their right leg, a simple modification is what's called a left foot accelerator. So essentially it provides an extension on the left side, so they're able to operate the gas and the brake with their left leg. Some individuals who might have short stature, you can actually extend the brake and accelerator pedals. So for those individuals that don't have the physical strength or range of motion, you can have what's called drive-by-wire or powered systems. So essentially, there's different manufacturers that do this, and one is an American-based company called EMC. Another is, both of them are European. It's called Joysteer and Paravan. And so this is an example of that system installed in the vehicle. So essentially over here, the individual is not using the OEM steering wheel, and they basically have, everything is dark over here, so it doesn't contrast well, but essentially they have the hand controls are electronic, and they brought within the vicinity of their left hand or right hand. You can also see over here, these are secondary controls that start the vehicle, change gears, things like that. So again, gear selection, air conditioning, all of those can be controlled using these kind of secondary controls. So really, pretty much the gas, brake, steering, and all the secondary controls can be modified in a vehicle for an individual to drive independently. And, even to the point of being able to unlock the easy lock is important. And there's a variety of systems that are available on the market. And again, it's most of the time, these are customized depending on the needs of the individual. There is also voice activated systems for secondary controls. There's advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, it's advantages because you can use your voice to control. But sometimes, if you have a lot of ambient noise, these systems don't always recognize what the individual wants to do. So sometimes these are more as a backup, and you still have wired controls. So just very quickly, this is a video of an individual that was born without arms or legs. And we like to kind of show how it is possible. Sometimes you look at somebody with a disability and people assume they can't be independent drivers, but this is a great example of somebody, really had a lot of motivation. We were able to get the proper driving evaluation. We had the individual license before they got their driver's license. And then this is his personal vehicle that he purchased. He was a VR customer in Florida, in the Miami area, and we were able to modify his vehicle. So the seat that he got on was the 6-way power seat base that I mentioned earlier. On his left is a joystick. So that joystick controls the gas, the brake, and the steering. To his right is a touchpad, which basically he's able to use to start the vehicle, change the gears, put on the turn signals, raise and lower the windows. You can see there's a little attachment, it's called a joey, that's used to help him with the seatbelt. So his wheelchair at the back, actually, you can see just a corner of it, but that's actually secured as well, because as I mentioned, if that was not secured, it can become a projectile if there's a hard brake or if there's an accident. So you can see a little bit closer about the touchpad. So he's applying, you can see with his left hand, he's applying the gas and then he's able to steer.
The following is a
So these are some resources. I know I kind of went quickly, but these are some resources. First one is our website at USF, which has some information that might benefit. NMEDA is the National Mobility Equipment Dealers Association. They actually, on their website, have more resources in terms of dealers, but they also have a good resource in terms of vehicles that are approved, that are compliant with federal motor vehicle safety standards. So that's a good place to start in terms of identifying types of vehicles that might be appropriate. ADED is the Association for Driver Evaluators, and they have a directory of all the driver evaluators around the country. And then lastly, RESNA is the Rehab Engineering Society of North America, which is a good resource for assistive technology. Okay.
Wonderful. So we do have, we have 3 questions, but the third question I'm actually we have 4. The one of them I'm going to leave for Jack though. But how expensive are these hand controls, and are there alternative routes to lower the cost? Is there funding that they can get? Because obviously we talked about like it can be very expensive. So, and a lot of these vehicles modified, are there grants? I'm assuming depending on the state, right?
Yeah, so mechanical hand controls, the ones that I showed you, like the push right angle, are not very expensive. Usually installed, they can be about $1,000. All vehicle manufacturers from European American import manufacturers offer almost like a $2,000 rebate if you buy a new vehicle towards any adaptive equipment. So if you purchase a vehicle and have adaptive equipment installed, you can send in the proof that you installed that adaptive equipment and they'll send you a check for $2,000. The powered gas and brake systems, the video that I showed you, can get expensive. As I mentioned, just the conversion alone to allow a person in a wheelchair to get in can be about $25,000, $30,000. The high-tech, the high-end electronic equipment can cost as much as $80,000. So there are agencies like vocational rehab, VA. I know there's some private foundations that do, if they are aware of people needing an accessible vehicle, that they will pay for them.
Yeah, and something that I've learned just in help to answer that question is it does depend on states. Sometimes there are conversion waivers Florida, unfortunately, is not one of the best for financial assistance, but there definitely are organizations that are willing to help, and maybe Jack can go into that a little bit more. But on top of that question, is it safe? Is it safe for these individuals to drive? Is a question.
Yeah, it's absolutely safe. In fact, there's been studies with NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Administration, that showed that people who are using hand controls were more safe because they had their hand on the gas and the brake, whereas somebody driving with their feet has to take their leg off the gas to apply the brake. So there's a little bit of a delay with somebody driving with their feet. But most important, what makes it safe is really to make sure that there is a proper evaluation done by somebody who is what we call a certified driver rehab specialist, a CDRS, because that individual is going to make sure that if there's any concerns with medication, for instance, so somebody can be on baclofen because they have spasticity. If they have too much medication, it might make them drowsy as a side effect. So really that evaluation is extremely important to look at the clinical aspects of driving and to actually put the person behind the wheel of an evaluation vehicle and determine what the appropriate equipment is.
Perfect. And then I'm going to have this between you and Jack, because I think you both can answer this. So most of the young men who have Duchenne are in power chairs. So what exams and tests will they have to undergo before going through all of this?
So like the all the driving, like the temps test or whatever they're called nowadays, you have to do all those tests, but usually there's an evaluation. I had to go to a couple evaluations because they didn't have the equipment at one of them, but there's like a PT or a therapist of some sort that will evaluate you to make sure that you can drive. I did have to there were a couple written cognitive tests just to make sure that I was okay to drive. And then one of them I was able to try the vehicle a little bit to so that the evaluator was able to determine if I could actually drive or not.
Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so the beginning of the process is really in Florida, you can get a learner's permit by basically taking a written exam or a computer exam. And that would be the first step, because once you get that learner's permit, you can get the driving evaluation. Sometimes when you get the learner's permit, the DMV in Florida will ask for medical clearance. And so again, the driving rehab specialist will do a vision test. They'll do a reaction time test. They'll put the person in the vehicle, evaluate their functional capabilities, and then actually recommend or prescribe equipment, which then can go to the DMV and they will allow that person to take a road test. So before they take the road test, again, we encourage our customers to have at least 10 or 20 hours of driver training, both in kind of urban highway settings, to make sure that they're confident, right? Because sometimes they might get on the road and then find out that they really don't want to drive because it's too anxious or tense for them.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. And if you guys have any more questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will again try to get to them at the end. But I am now going to hand it off to Jack to share his experience and his kind of his setup. Jack, do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to?
I could share it, I think. Hopefully.
Yep.
Hopefully, I think that's good now. Okay. So okay. So this is a picture of me driving, going out of the driveway. So
It's not going through. I see. Do you have two screens?
That might be it. Yeah, here. Here, I'll stop sharing for a second. Okay. Sure. Okay. You see it now? Hopefully we're good. I'll just,
There you go.
okay. So yeah, this was me pulling out of the driveway picture. Learning to drive a vehicle, it can be a complex, but it's worth the freedom and independence. I'm fine. Okay, so the first thing was the doctor's evaluation for like cognitive, physical, and they create a prescription from that. I actually had to go to two different places because the first evaluation I went to, they didn't have the proper equipment for me to drive. It was the hand controls, which I needed, or the manual, like manual hand controls, which I needed the power hand controls, so that didn't work out. But I went to the local hospital for the first one, and then the second one was at Brent's Driving School in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, because Ohio didn't have a vehicle with the technology that I would need to drive. It's about 3 hours away. I had to do a written test, and then we drove around a little bit in the vehicle to make sure that I could drive. And then the evaluator started working on like a prescription for exactly what I needed equipment wise. Yeah, additional. Yeah. Next thing is I had to get my temps was the first like it was the first thing. And yeah, I had to do the temps test twice because they expire after 6 months. So they expired before I was able to get the appointment to start driving. I work with OOD, which is Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, which is Ohio's focal rehabilitation agency. And they helped pay for fund training, and I had to do 3 weeks of training in Johnstown, Pennsylvania at Brent's Driving School. So that was like 3 hours from where I live. So we had to go there for 3 weeks. And then the OOD helped pay for training so that I could, when I get employment, I could drive to employment. And I'm currently in school, so I could drive to school too with that. 3 weeks. And then to get my license, I had to do all the tests that everyone else has to do. So there's a road test and maneuverability in Ohio that might be different depending on your state. And then along with that is there's a form that I have to get filled out, and you have to get filled out for like when you got your driver's license from your doctor. It depends on your state and things like that, but mine, I have to be evaluated every year. I think you could be need to be evaluated every 6 months, but it depends. Okay, so after the training, I had to get my license and then buy the car. Then the car got shipped to vendors to modify the car for like the ramp, put in the ramp and lower it and put in all the other equipment. And then we got the car, but then because it took so long, I had to do another, I think 20 hours of training. And that was helpful because it was driving like around my house and area around there. So that kind of helped. But yeah, so the ramp, and they lowered the car, and then they put a joist steer in, and there's an easy lock, which you could see at the bottom. It's like by the door. And then I actually installed another extra set of cameras to help with looking side to side and stuff like that. This is a picture of the touch screen, and I added these little button type things to make it a little easier. So it's kind of like a normal car, like you put the ignition on with this key that says park, reverse, and brake. So all those you can you have to hold down the joystick, and then you could change the different gears. This is a picture of like the screen I have to go to get out of the easy lock. So there's this like the lock icon with the wheelchair. That's what I have to click on, and it'll let me out of the vehicle. There's also this, which is the in case that doesn't work, or there I need to get out of the easy lock. There's this button, and this also has like the different ready, warning, and stop. Those are like when I turn on the car, it will buzz until I'm in the easy lock, so that you know that you're like secure and you're not gonna go anywhere. And then this is the actual what the easy lock looks like. So my wheelchair has like a pin that they installed, and then it goes into the easy lock, and that's how I drive. I'm locked in. This is another screen that you can control the windows and lock or unlock the car. This is a picture of my hand controls. So this is my wheelchair joystick. So I just drive straight in, and it clips in, and then my joystick goes up to the side so that I can reach the other things. This is another picture of This is another picture of the setup. I have it's a Dodge Grand Caravan. My driver instructor like gave us a list of different vehicles and the equipment. That's like they like make a full prescription report like at the end after my training. The modify was handled by 2 different vendors. They like do it based on like the cheapest one. So my vehicle actually had to go to Arizona to lower the floor and put the ramp in, and then it was shipped to Columbus, Ohio, which is about like 2 hours away from where I live, to put in the actual driving joy steer equipment that I use. I use joy steer equipment. That's what it's called. And then I had Easy Lock installed on the passenger and driver side. Like, so there's 2 different Easy Locks. So if I were to be a passenger, I can just use Easy Lock and go in. And then someone else could drive my vehicle, but there's like a switch you have to flip, and it's harder for someone that doesn't use like the joy steers stick, because it has the steering wheel has servos in it that are hard to turn. But you still can drive the vehicle. And then I'm getting a new wheelchair. So we have to work on getting the Easy Lock put on that once we get that. And then there's extra cameras to be able to see things. They're actually similar to what like police officers use. And then I have to get that medical card filled out every year. I passed the road test the first time, but I had to retake maneuverability, which was kind of difficult because I needed more training before I could even take the test again in the driver's adaptive van, because I didn't have my van at that point, because they wait till after you get your license before they start the van modification process, just in case something happens. This picture right here is I'm at a stoplight, and then if you could see on the mirror on the side, we added an extra little mirror to make it a little easier to see. This is a picture of when they were working to get the vehicle ready. This button right here is an option you could have by by my hand. That blue button it's an option you can have to do the turn signals and horn and stuff like that. And then they're also on the windshield, there's another mirror. So like that could be an option if you have trouble seeing around side to side and stuff like that. So there's some different equipment you could add to make it a little easier. And then I have is a picture of the camera I installed, so you could see like left, right, backward, forward. And then hope to see you on the road. So
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. We did have a question. There is someone who has a son who is 17, almost 18, lives in Ohio. Would you be willing to have him reach out to you if he has any other questions?
yeah, that would be great. I'd love to. Yeah.
And then we had another question come in. Did all of your vehicle modifications come after you drove a few times and then you realized what you needed, or were they all done at once?
So when I got when I had to go to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, but I used their vehicle for like the 3 weeks of training. So they their vehicle was set up in a way that they could like adjust it and change like the equipment that they had. So I think they did have some of the like just the steering wheel adjustments, or they could do different things like that. So their vehicle was set up so that people could like try it. And then from that, I took the driver's training and I took my test in that vehicle. So once we were able, like the 3 weeks of training also helped with the instructor being able to figure out what equipment exactly I needed. So yeah, there was a little bit of adjustment because like I had we were going to use like a button, but then they found a different, it's like it's kind of like a button, but it's smaller, so it made it a little easier for me to use it. So we made a couple adjustments from that perspective, but yeah.
Awesome. All right, it looks like we don't have any other questions, but I want to thank all of you, John, Stephen, and Jack, for being on and, you know, again, sharing your knowledge and experience and expertise with all of our community. So thank you again. We will be sending the links that were provided in the presentations today in a follow-up email with a survey. If you do have any other questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me. I will share my screen for just one more second so you guys can have my email as well. So that if you guys need anything at all, you can not hesitate to reach out, and I will definitely make sure to get questions to all of our speakers if you guys have any. So again, thank you for being here today. We hope to see you again at some of our later webinars and our webinars in 2023. I still can't believe we're almost done with 2022. So thank you again all for taking your time and being here. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our staff for making this happen. So thank you all for being here. Please feel free to share this webinar with anybody you feel might benefit from it. And we will see you soon. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.